Sounds good. All right, so the first survey item we'll go over, and this is found in the packet that we circulated just the other week. And on page 7, land use section, there were 3 different goals that were proposed. Maintain small town character, revitalize existing properties, and enable reuse of vacant properties. Everyone pretty much strongly agreed with these 3 goals. Is there anything else, besides comments that you've already provided, anything else someone would like to include, or any questions? All right, so then we'll move on to page 8, quality of development. The 3 goals that were proposed for this was to enable high quality commercial and residential development. Everyone agreed with this goal. Second was to ensure that commercial uses are compatible with residential uses. Again, everyone agreed with this one. And same story with the last goal, which was to ensure appropriate scale of developments. Any questions or further comments on these 3 goals? All right, so I'll move on to page 9, sense of community. The first goal here was to create a strong sense of place informed by the village's history. Everyone agreed with that. Secondly, improve the village's overall appearance. Same thing there. And third was to support a local sustainable food system. About 2/3 of respondents did agree with this goal, and then another third was neutral with that. So there may be some questions there with not having a strong opinion. So if anyone has any questions or comments with that one, let us know.
Yes, I got a question. When you say sustainable food system, is that like growing, say, vegetables in a garden or a grocery store or something at Urbancrest?
It can include a range of those items, but particularly for what we're doing in this plan is to have more, more local-based agriculture that people could use on their own property, or even potentially some vacant land in the community as well.
Okay.
So let me take that question down.
Michael, I did want to note for you, if you hadn't seen it already, that Terry Barr from our office is on the call and he is taking notes as well. So okay. Terry, if you can kind of pick up on the questions and write those down so that Michael can keep focusing on the presentation, we would appreciate that. And we did just have somebody else join us from 9750945. Could you announce yourself? Not 9750945. Could you announce yourself? Okay, well, Michael, continue on and we'll figure that one out later.
Briefly, before we move on that sustainable food system, is there any help on doing that? Because I've got some vacant land. I'd be interested in doing something like that this year if possible. Just make a note of that and we can continue on.
Sure. All right, so moving on to page 10 for housing. First goal was to support land use and building code policies that enable aging in place for all ages, such as incorporating universal building design, and everyone supported this goal. Secondly, encourage infill housing on vacant land that is zoned residential. 3/4 of the respondents supported this, and then another quarter was neutral. And finally, the third goal was to facilitate renovations of dilapidated structures. And the entire responding, or all of the respondents from the committee supported this idea. Any questions or comments on the housing section? All right, so we'll move to page 11 for walking and transit. The first goal was to improve pedestrian safety. 2/3 of the responding committee identified this as a needed goal. One person disagreed, and then there were 2 who were neutral on this issue. And then the second goal was to make transit attractive and accessible. Everyone agreed that transit should be more accessible and attractive for community members. Any further comments or questions on these 2 goals? All right. So then we'll move on to roadways on page 12. The first goal here was to improve connectivity to the outlying street network. And about 2/3 of the responding agreed that connectivity should be improved surrounding the community. Secondly, ensure that roadway infrastructure encourages following speed limits. 3/4, 75% identified this as a goal that should be implemented in the plan. Does anybody have any questions or comments regarding those 2 goals?
I got one on connectivity to outlying street network.
Mm-hmm.
3rd Avenue and 2nd Avenue dead into Lewis Center Way, and 3rd Avenue has a gate. Is there any plans to open up 3rd Avenue to through traffic or not? Make a note of that.
Yeah, we'll make a note of that. And that's actually one of the proposed infrastructure improvements that we got some survey data on. So we'll address that one in a little bit.
Okay.
All right, so page 13, recreation. Everyone agreed that some of the village's current vacant space should be preserved as green space or park facilities. And 3/4 of the responding committee stated that there should be a goal to repair existing pedestrian paths and create more opportunities for walking and biking in Urbancrest. Any further questions or comments? All right. So then the next section of the draft policy recommendations documents for the survey section anyway, was for the proposed land use and infrastructure concepts. And so these ones are a little bit more involved. I'll go over each one individually for the subsection. So first we'll start with the land use concept. This first concept is to accommodate mixed-use development and townhomes east of the railroad tracks. Nearly all of the committee agreed with this statement. Any questions or comments on this item?
I don't see that on my paper. Where are we now?
Oh, excuse me. I apologize for that. It's on page 17.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Got it.
All right, so we'll move on to the second one. A neighborhood commercial center that is central to the village is desirable. The location of this would be at the intersection of Main and Central 3/4 of the committee find this as a desirable product for the community. Does anybody have any further questions or comments?
Yeah, could you repeat that again, please?
Sure. So 3/4 of the committee agreed that a neighborhood commercial center that is central to the village at Main and Central is desirable.
What type of commercial center are you talking about? Because commercial center could mean several different things.
Sure. So a low intensity commercial uses, so like a salon, barber shop, a doctor's office, things that could be, don't necessarily require specialized facilities, so they can be more integrated with the community and more residential resembling structures.
Okay,
This is Brad.
Go ahead,
This is
Brad.
Brad Johnson. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Brad.
Yeah, I am the guy who joined 7 or 8 minutes ago and wasn't smart enough to click off my mute button. So my apology for that. The note I had put on this one is we must convince the tenants that the market is deep enough, because I understood the intent was to locate this more or less in the central part of Urbancrest as opposed to out on 62. Is that right?
That's correct.
And the concern that I think the retailers may bring to you, and I think it's worthy of running it up the flagpole and seeing, is there enough traffic, from 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning to 7 or 8 o'clock at night to sustain the retail that you're thinking about? Or are you better off putting that out, or more likely to succeed with it if you put it out closer to 62, east of the railroad?
Sure.
Anyway, just a thought from somebody in the real estate business.
Yeah, thank you for providing that comment. We've actually heard that from another stakeholder involved in this process as well. So we'll take into consideration moving forward. Thank you.
This is Mayor Barnes. I just heard what Mr. Johnson just said, and some of those things are running across my mind, and I do see our outer boundary lines as being able to support those type of structures of businesses. And the reason that I say that is because if they're on the outer boundary lines, we can maintain our residential integrity and still use that product that's there. And plus, as far as a business owner, they would benefit from the outside of the boundary line as well. We don't want to take businesses and bury them within the community, and they're not able to be accessible or viewed from the outer outlines. So we want everyone to be successful. We don't want to change the integrity of the residential area, and we want to be able to coexist with all of that and keeping everything with the country-like atmosphere and not trying to turn it into a commercial jigsaw puzzle, so to speak. So we have to be careful about where we're putting things or thinking about putting things. We have to really analyze, will those things be successful in those areas, and are they conducive for the overall outcome of what we're trying to achieve, and not just putting things together. So we need to really take consideration on what we're doing, how we're doing, and when we're doing, because everything is time process. We got to remember now that with the COVID-19 new system coming into play for the next 2 or 3 years, possibly, that we have to make wise decisions on how we do things. So we need to keep all of that in mind just as well, because out there in the business world, they're really not trying to get themselves into positions where there are uncertainties. Everyone wants to be certain as to what they're doing, how they're doing, and when they're doing. So we need to be on the same page with everyone else. So that's what I have for right now concerning that. Mayor Barnes.
Thank you, Mayor Barnes. This is Michael. We have actually been talking about this internally about maybe some of the proposed land use map in light of COVID-19. And I think that's a really good point. So thanks for chiming in with that.
You're welcome.
Just a question. The commercial, the neighborhood commercial center, would that host, or could that potentially host different businesses, for instance, like service industry or service geared businesses like a hair salon, barbershop, something that would be useful within the community? You know, being located in Central and Maine, it would be centrally located in some place where everyone could get to. Could that be like a laundromat for those who don't have laundry facilities? You know, businesses of that nature, not something like retail businesses, but more businesses geared to the community.
That's correct, Mayor. This is Michael again. That was what was envisioned for that, more kind of service-oriented businesses that would have more of a local customer base, so more surrounding Urbancrest and maybe some of the nearby border areas. All right, so we'll move to the next goal, which again, we're on page 17. And the final goal on this page is to renovate the old school, or excuse me, renovating the old school behind the Union Baptist Church into a neighborhood commercial center is strongly, or excuse me, is desirable. This was something that did not receive a high degree of support. Half of the responding committee was neutral, and an equal amount, 25% strongly agreed, and 25% strongly, or excuse me, 25% agreed, and another 25% strongly disagreed. So I thought is that there's not a lot of support for this concept. We should consider modifying our land use map in light that the commission did not support this concept. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add to this at this time?
I have a question. Union Baptist Church utilizes that entire building. So would this be like owning Union Baptist going to a co-partnership, like, or would the part of that building have to be purchased for the commercial center?
I think the how it would be played out would ultimately be Union Baptist Church's call, and there would have to be, I would potentially, some sort of partnership with the church if they'd like to retain some ownership rights, or it would have to be purchased outright. It was more of a conceptual thing to see if the community would be interested. We didn't have any formal mechanisms to actually get something like that implemented in mind.
Thank you.
It's Mayor Barnes here. Thank you, Mr. Cooley, for raising that question, because actually the entire building is owned by Union Baptist Church, and that's more of a private sector entity, because Union Baptist, even though it is a public church facility, but ownership is private and it's not public. So as you were saying, that is a area where negotiations would have to go before Union Baptist Church and their boards for even communication or discussion of. So thank you, Mr. Cooley, for bringing that up.
This is Matt. I wanted to just raise one point on the future land use map itself. One thing to keep in mind with this is that the future land use map is a community vision for how land is used in the future.
Mhm.
So if somebody proposes to change how a property is used, this map would serve as guidance to the decision-making bodies, ultimately the village council, on how community residents want various areas to be utilized. There are a lot of things, as have been brought up by Brad and Mayor Barnes, regarding just is there a market for commercial uses in the center of the village? We don't know that. We're not trying to get into that so much, but we're trying to reflect what we heard from the community during the first phase of the project, in which residents indicated a desire to have some more neighborhood serving types of businesses in close proximity. And so this location in the center part of the neighborhood is a location that we identified on the future land use map as a potential location. No one, I mean, those properties there are even privately owned, and ultimately it'd be up to those property owners' decision as to whether or not they would want to either sell to somebody that wanted to use the properties for this commercial purposes or not. The idea is the future land use map, again, is a guide for helping to make decisions in the future if someone proposes to change how they use or can use their property. It reflects the community's desires for how land is used, not getting into the market analysis kind of part of it and whether or not something could be successful there. So.
Before we go on, I'd like to I got a question on that future land use map since we're here. I noticed that the southeast corner of Urbancrest, you got purple there for light industrial. 3rd Avenue was my property, but anyway, they have my property in green. It's my understanding that my property is already zoned L1. I was just wondering why you got that colored in green instead of purple.
So in response to through our surveying, many community members identified a desire to have more green and natural space areas in the community. That parcel it's a pretty sizable parcel, and it's also been reported to maybe have some wetlands on it. I haven't actually been in the back of that property, so I wouldn't be able to make that claim, but it is thickly wooded. And so could be a space that would be host to natural trails or something like that. That's why it was identified. Obviously, as Matt has said, that you as the property owner, that would it wouldn't necessarily change how you can use your property currently, but if you were to rezone it, then that would be a consideration, what has been identified in the plan.
Okay.
All right, so we'll move on to the next page, on page 18, for the second set of land use concepts. The first concept is that residential areas west of Main Street and south of 4th Avenue should remain predominantly detached residential. And we had received in our surveys a question about what is a detached residential. It's just a standalone house. So what you would typically think of as a single family home. And so for this, 75% of the committee agreed with those statements. Any further questions or comments on that land use concept? All right, so we'll move to the second one. The gradual reduction in residential scale and intensity from the Broadway commercial corridor is appropriate. With this one, half of the committee agreed with it. And then about 2/3, well, not 2/3, about 37% of the committee, so about a third, disagreed with that. So with that, I will open, I'm sure we'll have some comments on the way we propose the scale to reduce from the mixed use area across the railroad tracks to the interior village. So I'll open the floor for comment on that if anybody has any. All right, well, if we don't have any comments on that, I'll move on to the next concept, which is that multifamily housing for all demographics, including seniors, is appropriately located. This one, everyone unanimously agreed upon that concept. Any questions or comments? All right, so we'll move to page 19. And Edward, this kind of gets to what you were talking about earlier with the park space and green space, is that the concept that the proposal contains adequate park and recreation space, which would include that parcel you were referring to earlier. And everyone agreed that there's, with what was proposed and what's existing, there's enough park and recreation space. Any further questions or comments on that one? All right, and so then the last one for land use is that there are no proposed changes to existing industrial or general commercial uses. I fill in the blank with this proposal. Over half of the committee agreed that there should be no changes to these areas. And then about another quarter was neutral with that. Do we have further questions or comments on that piece? Okay, so then we'll move on to the proposed future infrastructure improvements map. The map you'll see is on page 20, and then the surveys start on page 21. And we'll do this section the same way we did the previous one. So first up is that a signalized intersection at Broadway and Central should be considered, or at least somewhere on the Broadway corridor between 1st and 4th. As noted probably multiple times now, you would need a traffic study to put in a light. So the location may change, but generally the committee supported that there should be a traffic light in that area, somewhere in that corridor. Any further questions or comments on that concept?
Not on the concept, but on the map itself. I noticed you don't have John A. Cooley Drive on the map.
On the map, we just identified the main cross streets through the village. But we can make sure to include it on a future one, definitely.
Okay.
All right, so for the second one, traffic calming mechanisms should be installed at strategic locations to reduce speeding. This one had some mixed opinions on it. Half the committee said, yes, Urbancrest should install traffic calming mechanisms, while about 37% disagreed, and then another 12% didn't have any strong opinions on installing traffic calming. Does anybody have any feedback for us on this particular concept?
I have a question. When we had the first community meeting, was this question given to the residents at the meeting? Or what did they say about traffic calming mechanisms?
I know there was a question about prioritizing reducing speeding in the village. Matt, since I wasn't at that meeting, Matt, could you step in and respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing that we heard related to kind of traffic in the village was related to speeding. And so that's what was raised as a concern. And so this goal or concept came out of that concern raised by residents. And through the responses during that public meeting, residents provided input on the roadways within the village that they noticed the most speeding occurring. And so those would be areas kind of a focus, I would think, for the village.
So most of the surveys that you receive from the residents, I kind of just want this on the record, is that they want to see something done for traffic calming.
We would have to go back and look at the public meeting results document that was put out previously, which is on the website. I don't have that document open right now to give you the exact.
That's okay. I'll just give it a look-see. I'll check it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so if there are no further questions or comments, we'll move on to the next one. Fill in the blank. The sidewalk proposal is blank, inadequate, just enough, adequate. And so the committee unanimously said that what was proposed for sidewalks was just enough. So does anybody have any further commentary for this one? All right, so we'll move on to page 22 for the second set of infrastructure concepts. So as a part, I'll refer back to the map just for a minute on page 20. If you look on Main Street, there is a red dashed line, and that would be a line for that was proposed to be an on-street pedestrian lane. So it would be striped like in the image at the top of page 22. So having said, this survey question was that on-street pedestrian lanes will limit parking to one side of the street. I agree, strongly disagree, neutral with this proposal. Half the committee was neutral, did not oppose it or support it. A quarter did support it, and a quarter disagreed. Does anybody have any questions or comments with the on-street pedestrian lane? All right, so we'll move on to the second infrastructure concept on this page. Through access should be allowed at the intersection of Lewis Way with 2nd Avenue for cars. Edward, this was something that you had referred to a little bit earlier when we started the meeting. Half of the committee disagreed with this, and a sizable number strongly disagreed with opening up this intersection. 25% was neutral, and 5% agreed with it. And so we will be looking to remove this item from the future infrastructure map, or at least not make it a hard and fast recommendation. Maybe have it be something that is desirable for the village to consider in the future, in the distant future, but not something at the moment. So
excuse me, I think you was looking at the middle section there. That's 2nd Avenue. Am I right?
Yeah, Lewis Center Way and Second Avenue, correct. I know you had
Okay.
Third Avenue, but it's a similar
Okay.
similar concept.
Okay.
So the basic idea is to open up an access point to Lewis Center Way, more or less. Does anybody have any questions or comments on making this the change to the proposed infrastructure map?
Well, I think if you open Second and Third Avenue up to Lewis Center Way for through traffic, you know, not with the bollards, I got mixed feelings. I live on Third Avenue at the end of the street, and right now cars are going around the barrier coming up and down Third Avenue, which is illegal. And I don't know if, and a neighbor across the street, he's moving in, he's got kids, and you get a lot of through traffic coming down Third Avenue, and there's more residential houses on Second Avenue. My concern would be all that through traffic would impede the playing of the kids out front.
Right. So there's some issues with access at the end of Third Avenue as it is right now, but were it to be opened, you know, officially, you'd be concerned about traffic on the street for children playing in the area.
Yes.
Yeah, this is Mayor Barnes. I just want to chime in for the record. If you were to open Second and Third Avenue to traffic, once the industrial traffic found out about those accesses to Lewis Center Way, then you have no more residential traffic. Now you have through traffic. So you can look for semis, trucks, some of everything running through your residential area. Those were closed off for a purpose, and that's why we have Urbancrest Industrial Drive in a way. So if you want to bring that traffic, and we're already having issues with that traffic, leaving Urbancrest Industrial Drive and going out First Avenue or Central Avenue to First Avenue and drive through the village. So you would really, I think you would open up a issue that you're really going to have a problem trying to deal with. So those are my comments for the record on that issue.
And I agree with the mayor. I agree with the mayor.
It's Brad Johnson. I agree with the mayor also. You want to keep the segregation between the industrial activity and the residential. So I agree with the mayor.
Okay, so there's some concerns about what would it do to the character of the area were this to be opened up, and additionally, there may be some maintenance issues with the roads as well from the extra stress from the heavy vehicles. All right. Thank you for that, everyone. And so we'll move on to the last one on this page. Similar sort of concept as the previous one, except that it's just installing bollards on Lewis Center Way and Third Avenue, that intersection, to allow through access for bicycles, or at least maybe not across the entire section of Third Avenue, but just a section dedicated so bikes can go through instead of having to traverse around the fence that's current, or the gate that's currently there. Excuse me. So 50% of the committee was neutral with this one, and then about a third agreed with it. Do we have any further questions or comments on the bollards on Third Avenue?
Yes, I got a comment. If you rode a bicycle out on Lewis Center Way, there's no bike path lanes on that. And if that Grove City, so will we have to coordinate with Grove City to get a bike lane on there? Because I hate to ride a bike out through that bollard on Lewis Center Way and get bulldozed over by a tractor trailer. Because there's a lot of tractor trailer traffic on that road.
Yep. So that's one thing that is proposed as a part of the future infrastructure map is to run a bike lane down Lewis Center Way. That would, as you noted, would definitely need to have some coordination with Grove City. We selected that area because there's a bike lane on Southwest Boulevard that runs a pretty substantial distance, at least to Broadway, and then on the other end, out toward the schools near Southwest Boulevard. And the Grove City is slowly upgrading that on-street bike lane to a multi-use trail. So we thought it would be a good location to tie Urbancrest into some regional infrastructure. So, but the short end of that is yes, it would need some coordination with them. All right, so we'll move on to the last set of the infrastructure concepts, and this is on page 23. The bus stops that are central to Urbancrest should be the stops that receive prospective improvements. So we've talked about before to install like a bus shelter, benches, maybe a shade tree or something at a bus stop in Urbancrest to improve the experience of waiting for the bus. So the central location, which would be at Broadway and Central, about 63% of the committee agreed with that, and then the rest of the committee was neutral. Do we have any questions or comments on the bus stop improvements? All right, so we'll...
This is Mayor Barnes on that.
Sure.
Just for information purposes, when you, excuse me, you're looking at a shelter at Broadway and Central at Dakota bus stop, that's something that would have to be coordinated with CODA and the City of Grove City, because the City of Grove City actually has the easement there where the bus stop is. And then I'm not quite sure where ODOT comes into play on that, because I know that they are in play on Harrisburg Pike, but I'm not sure about Broadway as to how far their jurisdiction goes into Broadway. So those are just some side notes that you just need to put alongside that question and that issue, because I'm quite sure they are going to come into play.
Yep, we will note that. Actually, in the policy recommendations section, we'll spell out, you know, who some of the different parties that might need to be engaged as a part of a policy to pursue something like that. So yeah, but we'll definitely have to look into the ODOT issue. I'm not sure of the answer to that question. Matt, do you know if ODOT would come into play with that, or?
To the mayor's point, I'm not sure how far down ODOT's jurisdiction goes along the roadway, but yes, anyone that has a right to say what happens within the public right-of-way area is going to have to be involved and engaged in this process. My office coordinates with CODA on a regular basis in completing community planning projects, putting together recommendations, and they've historically supported recommendations for bus stop improvements. However, just like everybody else, their funds are limited for what they can do. And so it all takes a partnership and working together. But it is something that the community identified was a desire for us, was to have some improved bus stop facilities there for waiting for the bus.
You know, while we're on the subject of CODA and the bus stops, and I would like to see a possibility of 3 stops from CODA within the village instead of just at Broadway. maybe on First Avenue, one on John Cooley, and one on Central. So that gives CODA basically a simple entrance and an exit out without having to really change much of its course. So that's something that could be printed in note to the side. Then also in our industrial areas on Center Point, just as well, because they have a stop on Harrisburg, but they don't actually have a stop up in the industrial area, from which I think that there could be two, one on the east side of the street, one going in and one coming out. And then on Urbancrest Industrial Drive, there's a lot of industrial workers there, from which could benefit from CODA making a route in and a route out, or some sort of an accessible relay that they put together in Grove City that could be a part, from which they were talking about expanding into Jackson Township and Urbancrest, and having that included in this future outlook piece, because it's necessary, and it would be, I think, very advantageous for CODA, from which they would pick up more riders. But then as far as the businesses, they would be able to get their employees a safe route to work without having to walk in areas that are at certain times of the night that are not lit up very well, or it's just too much traffic. So those are some side notes that could go into that area just as well. So that's what I have with that.
One other side note, didn't CODA used to come in from Broadway going west on First down to John A. Cooley and hook around up Central and go back out, and then they stopped doing that?
Yes, they did. It was back in the 80s, maybe. And
yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, it's back in the 80s, and we haven't seen it since. But now they're sort of having this little outreach or latchkey type bus.
Okay.
You can get off on Broadway and First Avenue, and then that latchkey bus, if you want to call it that, would pick them up from that point and take them to their site. So it's something that CODA has put in place, and I know that they were test marketing it in Grove City at this particular time. So those are just some thoughts and ideas that just need to be written into the notes that are possibilities.
Mayor Barnes, this is Michael. Thank you for that. We'll definitely look further into exploring how we could propose to have transit expanded in the interior village. Just for the record, and I don't know if Terry was able to get these written down, what were the 3 locations again that you said should have the stops?
I was saying within the village, we're looking at First Avenue, John Cooley Drive, and Central Avenue.
Great.
That way it gives the bus room to run, which hits the central points of the village, and not having to worry about being caught in tight places or anything like that. And plus, all 3 of those stops are pretty much accessible to all parts of the village. So,
right.
That would make it profitable and more economical, not to mention more community favorable for the village and CODA as well.
Great, thank you. Terry, are you set on that?
We're recording the presentation or this meeting, so if we've got to go back and amend or add on to our notes, we can certainly do that.
I forgot about that. All right. Okay, so we'll move on to the second infrastructure concept. Again, we're on page 23. It stated that a multi-use biking and walking trail should connect Urbancrest to future regional infrastructure. We kind of touched upon this a little bit earlier, but the majority of the committee agreed with this statement. Do we have any further comments on this concept?
It's Mayor Barnes again, and I don't know how how this could be worked out. I don't know if we would have to work with the railroad to become a part of that, but I could see where if there was a bike lane that went down the tracks to Southwest Boulevard, which would make it walking and walking and bike path, which would connect to the bike path that's already in Grove City on Southwest Boulevard. And all the way, and then in some places I've seen where the bike trail runs 3 or 4 miles through the little community areas to connect to other areas. So it's just a thought that that's something else that could be put into the notes, because I could see a bike trail from where our tracks run that run all the way down to Klein Road. But, that's just like we said, we're just basically looking at a wish list right now, but that's just something that could be put in the notes for future evaluation.
Sure, and that actually, thank you for that comment, because that ties into the next goal, as a matter of fact, that the multi-use trail is routed appropriately. So half the committee was neutral on that, and another half agreed. So with your comments, we'll take another look at what could be an alternative scenario for where the multi-use trail is routed.
Hey guys, can I ask a question real quick? I apologize for the interruption, but can someone give me some idea how often the rail line is used? Does anybody know?
It varies. This is Mayor Barnes speaking, but it varies. It doesn't have a set time when trains come through. I know we may see trains maybe 3-4 times out of the week. It just depends on what kind of freight, cargo, whatever the demand is as it goes from one area to the next. So it's sort of hard to calculate on that because we really don't have a schedule.
What rail line is that, Mayor, if you don't mind me asking? Brad, would you know?
I do not remember. They don't go by there very often. I do know that.
Okay. Great. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, but I think if we took a look at the rail gates up there, the name of the rail line is on there. But I do know that if you contacted the Ohio Department of Transit and Railways, they can give us the information as to.
I can look it up. I can look it up because we had to write them a big check to put a rail crossing in.
Okay.
Well, I've got it. I just don't recall it. That was 15 years ago, maybe.
Is that CSX?
I think that's right. But let me double check it.
Brad, why don't you double check it if you could let us know? We'd appreciate that.
Okay, will do.
All right, so that about wraps it up for the infrastructure concepts. Next up, what we'd like to go over fairly quickly, we've only got 30 minutes here for the remainder of this meeting, is the action steps to achieve some of these goals. You can look in your packet. This section starts on, let me pull it up. It starts on page 25. We're not going to go over these in depth, especially because just due to time, but definitely take a look and review those and respond to them on the feedback form. which we will go over now. So if you go to the feedback form, and it's the page that says further concerns, yes, no, keep it, change it, and some lines for questions and comments. So moving back to where we first started, to achieve the goal of maintaining the small town character, the 3 actions we have here are to adhere to the recommended land uses. So the uses recommended in the map, the proposed map that we've noted we have to make some revisions to. Develop regulations to enhance small town character, and adopt commercial and residential design standards. Now, just at a glance, again, because in the interest of time, we want to keep this short, but just at a glance, any initial comments on these 3 items? All right. So then the second goal for goal B for land use is to revitalize existing structures. So 2 actions that have been identified for this one is to create opportunities to facilitate home repairs and to implement a rental housing inspection program. Any initial thoughts on these?
Yes. Is there any contact phone numbers for opportunities to facilitate home repairs? Basically, is there any numbers like Morpsey that you could call if you need some home repairs that they could assist with, like financial aid or anything like that?
Yes, there are. There are a number available in Central Ohio. If you, I think it's on page 26 of those action steps. There's a number of them listed. Morpsey, the Economic Development Community Institute. There's a number of them, and we'll refer to them in the plan.
Yeah. Okay. I see that, just like a contact phone number. Well, I guess I could Google it. That's okay.
Yeah, I don't have a number for them right on hand right now. All right, so goal C for land use is to facilitate maintenance and reuse of vacant properties. The 3 actions identified for this are to expand regulations of the existing property maintenance code, establish community gardens on vacant properties, and for the village to take corrective actions for and or against tax delinquent properties, and also to acquire some of those tax delinquent and foreclosed properties. Any initial thoughts on those action steps?
I'm sorry, I wasn't able to say, so I wanted to say something about implementing a rental housing inspection program.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is an excellent idea. Especially a lot of our properties out here are being rented by small families, and the houses have a lot of, they look nice, but they are being neglected on the inside. And so I think that will be helpful.
Yeah, thank you. So the idea behind that was foremost to put the safety of the tenants at the forefront, but there are also some spillover benefits for property owners, that when those properties are maintained, it maintains property values in the area. All right. So then we'll move on to the set of goals for quality of development. The first goal here, as we went over earlier, was to enable high quality commercial and residential development. We have 4 different actions on how this can be achieved. The first is to require the use of stormwater management best practices. Second, you can require new development to be pedestrian oriented. Third, you can encourage energy efficient and accessible for all designs. So this is an aging in place related action. And fourth, support the development of small businesses in the community. Any initial thoughts on these 4 actions? All right, so we'll move on to.
Looks like Curtis has a question there.
Yeah,
I
go
do.
ahead.
I apologize. My mind was faster than my fingers. Would the village have any idea how many small businesses are within the village?
Is that a question for the mayor?
Yes, sir.
I would say, and I'm just going off the top of my head, and we're talking about small businesses. I would think at this particular time we may have about 12.
12. Okay.
12 or 13 in that area of small businesses in the village right now.
Okay. All right. Thank you, man. Would you happen to know if any of those owners are residents of the village?
That I would not be able to say whether they actually live in the village. That I really couldn't say. Not at this particular
Okay.
time.
Okay. Thank you. Just curious.
Well, wait a minute. Let me go back just a little bit. I think there may be 3. Now that you made me go back into my archives, I think there are 3.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm sorry. Who am I speaking with? Did they?
Curtis.
Is this Mr. Williams?
Yes, sir. It is.
Oh, okay. I just like to know who I'm conversing with. Thank you.
Okay. No problem. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so we'll move on to goal B then. And again, that's to ensure new development is compatible with existing residential development in use and scale. The first action for this is to implement the recommended land use map for residential uses. So that's, again, the proposed land use map. Second, permit a mix of uses in key corridors, so predominantly along Broadway. And action 3, adopt a neighborhood commercial zoning district. Initial thoughts on these actions? All right, so we'll go to the next section for a sense of community. One of those goals is to create a strong sense of place informed by the village's history. And so 2 actions we have to achieve that goal are to inventory and commemorate historic places and enhance the community's sense of place through public art installations. Any comments on those 2? All right. So with that, I'll move on to the second goal here, which is to improve the village's overall appearance. First action for that is to install municipal infrastructure with consistent designs. Secondly, install landscaping improvements and high visibility locations and corridors. So for example, the Broadway corridor. And to initiate a vacant lot improvement program. Initial thoughts on those 3? All right. So with that, we'll move on to the third goal for this one. There's a couple of different actions. There's 6 of them, so there's quite a number, but I'll list them off real quick. Support a sustainable local food system is this goal. And so the 6 actions are to permit gardening on vacant village-owned properties, permit raising of small livestock, establish a farmer's market, allow farm stands as an accessory use, permit food truck operations in commercial areas, and explore developing a community kitchen and food hub. Any initial thoughts on, I know there's a number of them, but on any of the 6?
These are all wonderful ideas. And I also think that it's really important that within our village that we have some type of local food system that's sustainable. The community kitchen and food hub, brilliant. I love that. I think that would be able to assist a lot of residents.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to housing. So the first goal here, support land use and building code policies that enable aging in place for all ages and sustainable housing. To achieve this, the community or Urbancrest can enable the construction of more housing types, as has been noted a number of times, particularly senior housing. Secondly, provide information regarding emergency home repairs and accessibility modifications. And also another one to provide information regarding energy efficiency programs and support the use of renewable energy sources, geothermal and solar. Initial thoughts on those 4? All right, so we'll move to second goal here, encourage infill housing on.
Excuse me, before we move on.
Sure.
I was just had a little brainstorm here for a second. And when we're talking about housing and enabling, well, we were talking about action 2, provide information regarding emergency home repairs and accessibility modifications. Provide information regarding energy efficient programs and support the use of renewable energy sources. These are agencies within the county, I believe, and I'm just thinking here, if for future reference and side notes, if there was a possibility that there could be a partnership between the county and the village to be able to put a satellite entity that which houses all of these services in the village, make it more accessible not only to Urbancrest but to this Southwest quadrant, and take some of the weight off of people not being able to get downtown or have access to computers and things like that, where they understand how the process is, what they need to do, when they could probably travel less than a mile or 3 miles or less to an agency satellite where they could get the same services without so much congestion and confusion. So that might be something we could put to the side to look at for future as well.
Sure. So I couldn't speak to the staffing issue there, but we'll make note of that to explore it. But the idea we have behind this is that, you know, if someone comes and applies for a building permit, or there's some sort of action for a property maintenance violation or something like that, to try to work with folks to get them connected to resources, kind of like a one-stop shop sort of thing.
Right, we're on the same page there. Yes, sir.
Yep. All right. Okay, so and the next one was to encourage infill housing on vacant land that is zoned residential. First action for that is to expand the creation of new owner-occupied homes. Second, enhance village marketing strategies to attract new residents. And third is to explore reduced lot size and frontage minimums. Any initial thoughts on these 3 actions?
Yeah, this is Mayor here. I think that, and this is just me thinking and speaking here. I think that if you reduce lot size and frontage minimums, you're going to take away from the atmosphere of the community. You're going to change the appearance of the community to a point, and then it's not going to look as cohesive as it does now. I think that new housing is necessary, but I think that the new housing needs to come in the way the village is already set, and not to change its appearance or its feel. Uh, those are my thoughts on that. Because if we don't really want neighbors sitting on top of neighbors, because now you lose your country atmosphere and your sense of relaxation that we have here in the village, as if it were in the city. So that's something that we do want to try to avoid. So that's my thought on that.
All right. So your thought is that if the community, changes the dimensions of the lots and makes them smaller for residential development, it'll start to not detract, but change the character of the area.
Correct.
All right. So we'll be sure to make note of that. Any other comments from anyone?
Hey, Michael, this is Matt. I just wanted to raise a point to the mayor's comment. The future land use recommended future land use map and the goals and actions, those were derived partially from the feedback we received from participants in the public meeting and online surveys. And when we were looking at the public meeting results for residential land use, 76% of people did say that they wanted to see more houses built in the community. 49% of people disagreed that there are enough housing options available in the neighborhood to allow them to remain as they get older. And then on the question about the type of residential development that people wanted to see, it was 56% single family homes, 17% two-family homes, 12.5% townhomes, 7.8% condos, 6.25% apartments. And I only raise that because it shows that the community did express some desire for alternative housing types within the community, and that may necessitate, changes to existing code and standards. We recognize the need for any new development in the community to respect and retain that existing country-like feel, but I don't think you can achieve that throughout the entirety of the community, if that makes sense.
I understand what you're saying, and of course, we haven't taken a look at the village's zoning map concerning areas, but all of the places pretty much that, or different looks that you have mentioned, there are areas zoned for those type of structures to be built. And when you mention single family residential, there are specific lot sizes and things like that for that to take place, just as well as what we have. Basically, we have R1, R2, R3, and we have R4, which is multiple and apartments. So all of those areas are available in the village, and they're all set at specific lot sizes, and we just don't want to try to take a single family lot and split it in half to put two houses on it, which will put people sitting right on top of people. That changes the perception or the look of the R1. Now in R3, R4, those areas, it can be done because the lot sizes are bigger. So those are just some of the things we just need to look at. But we do understand what you're saying, but we're just letting you know that the village does have areas where those things can take place. So that's what I'm just saying when we talk about changing lot sizes and things like that, we need to just make sure that we are staying within those things that are acceptable and are amenable to where we are and what we're trying to do. Thank you.
Sure. And there are other ways you can try to preserve some of the community character as well, as a part of these action steps. We have an action that's encompasses design of residential buildings. So you could identify certain characteristics of in the housing stock and Urbancrest, and require that new builds, incorporate some of these to reflect the current character of the area. So that's another option. All right, so we'll move on to the third goal. And this is a goal that we added in response to the previous working committee meeting. We got some comments that in the first public meeting, there were a number of comments on affordable housing, but we did not include any sort of goals for affordable housing in Urbancrest. So we wanted to include this goal. Please be sure to, if you have any further concerns about inserting this goal into the greater set of the goals, use the feedback form to let us know. So this goal, I'll state it, is to maintain and expand Urbancrest's affordable housing stock. The first action for this is to permit accessory dwelling units. And the second action is to consider incentive programs for the development of affordable. Initial thoughts on those three items.
Yeah, this is Mayor Barnes on action one. Just so we can all be on the same page, when you have permit accessory dwelling units, what are we saying there as far as accessory dwelling units?
So accessory dwelling units are they can be done a number of different ways, but typically it's another dwelling unit that's constructed on an owner-occupied property, and generally they're capped at a certain size. So it can either be a percentage of the square footage of the main home on the property, or it can just be a flat number. And they can be detached or to the main home on the property, or they can be detached. So how that looks is ultimately up to the community, how you'd want to govern the size of it and the siting of it and all those things.
Okay, but I understand that. But what I'm saying is, what are we talking about? Accessory dwelling. What is the accessory dwelling? What are you classifying as accessory dwelling? I'm not worried about dimensions or anything like that. What is the structure?
So the accessory dwelling is the additional smaller dwelling on the property. So if you were to think of, I guess a common one is like above garage dwellings, something like that.
So you're saying to put a garage on the property and then put a living quarter above it? Is that what we're saying? Or am
Yeah,
I
something. Yeah, that's correct. So it would have to have its own living facilities, so a kitchen and a bathroom and all of that stuff.
So now the village does have in its zoning for structures or accessory dwellings, but and it does have to be a residential home or structure on the actual property in order to be able to put an accessory dwelling on it. You can't take a vacant lot to do that. So again, we have to be careful because now we're talking about taking a residential place and then taking and putting a garage there and then putting another living quarters over top of that. So that changes a lot of dimension and appearance as well. And it's the same as if we want to take a commercial building where you have your shops down below and then you have residential above. So that's a mixed use, as the same as the garage would be a mixed use. So we have to make sure that we're being clear for everyone, as transparent as possible, so that everybody knows what they're, what they're looking at when they are talking about making changes, or if they choose to keep or change. So we just want to make sure that, because we don't want to put ourselves into a situation where we check something off we don't understand and then come back later and say, that's not what we wanted. That's not what we want. We want to make sure that we are doing things where everybody understands what's going on, and that we can put this into our future wish list. So we want to make sure we have some cohesiveness and in this all together. So I just want to make sure of that. And then I just want to say one other thing, then I'm going to back off the mic here, is that when we fill out our survey forms to mail them back in, pull out your paperwork from your meetings and read through that as you go to check off your survey list here, so that everything still remains the way that you would like to see it to be. So then, with that being said, I'm just gonna back off the mic now. So I'm muting myself.
Absolutely, Mayor Barnes. I think when you write the regulations for accessory dwelling units, you would want to be really careful with the language, just to ensure that there aren't any unintended consequences where, like I said, we wouldn't want someone to build a garage on a vacant property and then put a dwelling over top. So yeah, you have to be careful with the language and the specifications to make sure it all meets what is actually intended and that there's no loopholes with it. All right, so with that, we're at 6 o'clock, but we have 7, 11, a couple more, probably about 13 or 14 more actions to get through. If everyone would be okay with spending maybe just like a couple more minutes just to get through these quickly, we'd appreciate it. But if not, feel free, you can just drop out as well from the call.
Let's get moving, make it quickly.
I'm trying. All right, transit. We'll move on to transit. This goal is to make transit more attractive and accessible. So as we talked about earlier, an action is to initiate improvements at the bus stop at Central and Broadway, and also to provide information regarding mobility programs to residents with known mobility needs. All right, so we'll move on to roadways then. Again, we talked about this action, which is a stoplight at Broadway. And the second action for roadways is to consider long-term future through access at the intersection of 2nd Avenue with Lewis Center Way. That's more of, it should say distant term, not long-term. Any initial thoughts on those? All right.
No, I was just going to say, there again, we want to preserve the integrity of the small village. And like the mayor alluded to earlier, do we really want through traffic making 2nd Avenue and Lewis Center Way an open street?
Absolutely, yeah. We'll have to look into tinkering with this one, or maybe removing it completely when we get back to the drawing board. But yeah, well, we've definitely heard the concerns for that.
I was just agreeing with Mr. Cooley that I don't think any throughway is a good for vehicles is a good idea. I'm leery on the one with the bike, but the definite no for the cars.
All right. So we'll take note of that, and we'll have to revisit that one. Especially, given the survey results too, there was a lot of strongly disagree on there. So we'll have to take another look at it. All right. So moving on from that set of actions for goal A, goal B is to ensure that roadway infrastructure encourages following speed limits. 4 ways you can do this is to implement calming at key locations, consider a complete streets policy, install stop signs at the railroad crossings on First Avenue and Central Avenue, and collaborate with the Franklin County Sheriff's Office to address speeding through the village. Initial thoughts on those 4. Okay, so we'll move on to Parks and Recreation then. The first goal for this is to preserve some of the village's undeveloped areas as parks and green space. 3 ways this can be accomplished is by preserving some natural space. That parcel that Edward Cooley was talking about earlier, his property in Southwest Urbancrest. Second, establish park space on the vacant parcels along Augusta Street and the railroad tracks, and maintain and improve existing park facilities. Comments or questions, just at a glance at these? All right, and so the last set here is to create more opportunities for walking and biking. 4 actions are to adhere to the future transportation maps multi-use path recommendations. Second, adhere to the bicycle facility recommendations. Third is to install bike racks at public locations. And 4th is to require bike racks with newer substantially modified developments. Initial thoughts. All right, well, if we have no further comments or questions, thank you for sticking in another couple of minutes there. That'll wrap us up. So,
Hey, Michael.
Yes, Curtis.
If you guys don't mind, could I take you back to page 32, goal C, maintaining on the affordable housing issue?
Mm-hmm.
When you use the term affordable housing, you're not describing what that is. And the term affordable housing nowadays really have a negative connotation. And it's a dangerous one as well, too. So I would kind of advise that we kind of look at the terminology being used. COSIC, for example, has gotten into building what's called affordable housing on behalf of the county and the city. And our affordable housing really is priced towards middle income people making around $90,000 a year, up to 90. And the houses we build really cost about $280,000 to $300,000. And that is affordable housing. So I think given the village's desire to have a range of housing for people that are young and people that are seniors and those of us who are in between, don't laugh. So if we can use some terminology that perhaps says something like the provision of affordably priced housing for income diverse population. And that's pretty much what something like that would be appropriate, other than just saying affordable housing. Because I think it sends a wrong connotation in terms of what Urbancrest is wanting and trying to be in terms of serving all sector of its population.
I agree with Mr. Williams. Keep in mind, Beulah Park is selling their new land, that community up there. Their houses are 360,000.
Right. Yeah, thank you, Curtis. It definitely wasn't our intention to try to make it be something exclusive, but
Well, I know.
we will definitely make that revision because that is an important thing to know.
Curtis, this is Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. This is Mayor Barnes. I just want to say thank you. I know I had muted my mic, but that was something that I was about to unmute my mic about and address that. But I appreciate you looking at that from that point of view. We do want to raise the perception in Urbancrest, and I thank you for those words. And I thank the county for working with us on this and helping us to put this thing in its proper perspective. And all of the members of the board, I appreciate your assistance and input as well. So I just want to let you guys know I appreciate everything that's going on here.
Curtis, this is Matt. And we can talk offline on this if we need to get the right wording here on this type of action. But is something along the lines of, accessible to all income ranges or something along that. Would that be helpful?
It wouldn't, Matt. It really would.
Okay. Well, we can play around with that and touch base with you on that to make sure we get that worded how it does need to be.
Yeah, thank you. But I do want to make sure that it's worded in a way that's inclusive. So that's important. Thank you.
So just so everybody understands the next steps, I think Michael is going to have ask for the feedback forms to be returned by next Friday. That is the 22nd. Michael provided a postage paid envelope for your self-addressed postage paid envelope for you to place your completed feedback forms into, and just take the time to think about these actions. So there's a lot of stuff here. There's a lot of text here. Read through it, and then on your feedback form, if you have questions, comments, put it all down on that feedback form so we can make sure we get these things right. Because once we get the feedback forms, we will be making revisions to this information in preparation for the next public engagement piece of this project. Michael, did you want to say anything about that next public engagement piece?
I do. I think, in light of everything that's going on with coronavirus, it seemed like there's going to have to be some sort of virtual component, if no public meeting or in-person meeting. And so I think we want to hear from you all. What would be the best way, do you think, to try to engage community members in a virtual setting, or maybe some kind of, we mail out surveys or something like that? So, we just want to open the floor to the committee, know how we could, engage people outside of the working committee. Do you all?
The virtual, but I also, and plus because it has the capabilities of you just to call in. Mm-hmm. So the Zoom is helpful, I think, would be, but I don't think that's going to be enough, just because of some folks' access to internet or even to cell phones or that sort of thing, or even the capabilities to work the Zoom program, that it would have, I feel like it will be necessary to at least mail out, or I don't know if the village administration can include the survey in the flyers that we get connected to, on our houses or in our mailboxes. But I think it have to be different ways. It might have to be mail and Zoom.
Sure. Yeah, we were thinking about some kind of combination like that, in recognition that, might not have reliable access to the internet, or may not be comfortable with it. So any other thoughts, Mayor Barnes? Do you think that maybe, dropping off some packets or something like that would be something that we could coordinate?
Yeah, if we're talking about dropping off packets here at the municipal hall for each residential structure in the village, then we probably look at about 350 packets or so. And we would then coordinate to get those out to every residential structure in the village. But that is one way, but I don't know about everyone else, but I'm looking forward to an actual come in, take a seat, sit down, and let's have a meeting sometime in the future.
Believe me, we all feel the same way. This is tough.
Yes, quite. But
Yeah.
but I was just saying, whatever we need to do to make sure that the community is aware and involved, then that's what we need to do.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have to think about that a little bit more. I think we can probably figure out a way to get some type of informational packet to the village for distribution throughout to the residents, and include a way for people to be able to provide the responses. We'll think about some type of virtual convening that we can do. Just currently, I think that next public engagement piece was intended for mid-June. And just given the direction of that everything's going, I can't imagine that we're going to be permitted to have an in-person meeting right now. With that being said, though, the plus side is that there is another phase to this process, even after this next public engagement piece, and that's putting the whole plan together, taking everything we've worked on thus far and putting it into an actual plan document. And, we had intended to have a public meeting with that. So maybe at that point, at least we can get together in a public setting and sit down and see everybody with that draft plan. That's kind of fingers crossed and being optimistic still, I think. But hopefully that's a possibility.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to it. Never say never. I'm looking forward to it.
Hopefully soon. Yeah.
Michael, anything else you needed to?
I think I'm all set. Thanks again, everyone, and thanks again for sticking around for another 15 minutes. I appreciate it.
All right, you're welcome,
Michael,
and everybody
thank you,
stay
guys.
safe.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you. Do the same.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a blessed one, everyone.
You too,
Goodbye.
Mayor.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Mr. Williams.